So how does a nation feed over 1 billion people? Today, we're going to dive into India's fields of change. It's a story of ancient traditions, modern revolutions, and it's a story that affects 2/3 of the country's population, and really has a huge impact on the entire planet. So let's start small. Let's start with a young girl named Rinja from Assam. She loves her home and she loves helping her family bring water to their fields. But here's the thing she can't see, the bigger picture. This constant cycle of farming that's always searching for fresh, fertile ground. Her story really is the human heart of this absolutely massive agricultural system. And Rinja's story brings us to the big question, right? It's a huge one. So how does a country where 2/3 of the people are involved in farming actually do it? From ancient traditions to brand new tech, what does it all really look like on the ground?
Okay, so to get our heads around this, let's zoom out from Rinja's family for a minute and look at the 3 main farming systems you'll find in India. You can think of these as the 3 main blueprints for getting food from the ground to the table.
All right, first up is what's called primitive subsistence farming. And this is exactly what Rinja's family does. It's a method that's been around forever, sometimes called slash and burn agriculture. A family will clear a small patch of land, they'll grow food using just the soil's natural fertility, and then, once that's used up, they move to a new spot. This lets the old land recover. And the key thing to remember here, this isn't about making a profit. It's about survival, plain and simple.
Okay, next up, we've got intensive subsistence farming. This is what happens when you have a whole lot of people but not a lot of land. The goal here is to squeeze every last drop of production out of a tiny plot. So unlike the primitive style, this method relies heavily on irrigation and biochemicals because the pressure is just immense. The land gets passed down generation after generation, getting split into smaller and smaller pieces. So you can imagine every single square foot has to count. And that brings us to our third system, commercial farming. Now, this is where the game completely changes. The goal isn't just to feed your family, it's to produce for the market. This is farming as a business, a big one, using all the modern tools, high-yield seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, all to get as much out of the land as possible to sell it. Think about a massive tea plantation where one single crop is grown over a huge area, all for industry and export. So, when you put these three side by side, you really see what makes them tick. For primitive farming, it's all about feeding your family, period. For intensive farming, it's about getting the most out of a small piece of land because of population pressure. And for commercial farming, the goal shifts entirely to making a profit in the marketplace. 3 systems, 3 completely different worlds. All right, so we've got the how. We know the systems. But the next big piece of the puzzle is the when. See, farming in India moves to this really distinct rhythm, a beat that's been set by the seasons for thousands of years. So the agricultural calendar in India isn't just one big loop. It's actually broken down into 3 distinct seasons. You've got Rabi, which is the winter crop, Kharif, the monsoon crop, and then there's a short little season in between called Zayed. Now we're going to focus on the 2 big ones, Rabi and Kharif. First, you've got Kharif, and this season is all about the monsoon. Crops get planted right when the first rains hit, around June, and they're harvested in the fall. These are the crops that just love water. Think of rice or paddy, which is the absolute king of this season, but you've also got maize, cotton, and jute. The success of this entire harvest, it all comes down to whether those monsoon rains show up. Then, after the monsoon, comes Rabi. This is the winter season. These crops are sown as the monsoon fades away, and they grow through the cooler, drier months before being harvested in the spring. And the star player here is wheat, along with barley, peas, and mustard. And you can see it's a completely different challenge. These crops are counting on that winter rain and irrigation to make it. Okay, so we've got the systems, we've got the seasons. Now let's zoom in on the 2 crops that are, without a doubt, the absolute backbone of India's food security, rice and wheat. These 2 grains feed more people in India than anything else. And just to give you a sense of the scale here, when it comes to rice, India is the 2nd largest producer in the world, right behind China. I mean, that is a staggering amount of food, and it's the staple meal for the majority of the population. So what does it take to grow all this rice? Well, being a Kharif crop, it needs a couple of key things. It needs heat, we're talking over 25 degrees Celsius, and it needs a ton of water, from both high humidity and more than 100 centimeters of rainfall. And that's exactly why you see it thriving in the plains and along the coasts. It's a really demanding crop, for sure, but it's also the main source of calories for literally hundreds of millions of people. All right, let's talk about the second pillar of India's food supply, wheat. So if rice is king in the south and the east, wheat is the absolute staple in the north and the northwest. It's the other crucial half of the whole food security equation. And get this, the conditions it needs are almost the complete opposite of rice. As a rabi crop, wheat needs a cool season to get started and then bright sunny skies to ripen. It also needs less water, somewhere around 50 to 75 centimeters of rain. It's this contrast, this perfect opposition, that lets India pull off two massive, totally different grain harvests every single year. But listen, Indian farming is so much more than just rice and wheat. The diversity is just incredible. So for our next section, let's take a look beyond the grain at some of the other vital crops that fill up the nation's plates and fuel its industries. And seriously, the diversity is staggering. You've got pulses, which are a huge source of protein, oil seeds for cooking oil, you've got sugarcane, a major cash crop, global favorites like tea and coffee, and then essential fiber crops like cotton and jute. Each one plays its own unique and vital role in the economy. Just to give you an idea, let's look at two of these. Okay, on one hand, you have pulses. Here's a fun fact. India is the world's biggest producer and the biggest consumer of them. They're a critical source of protein, especially in a largely vegetarian diet. Then, on the other hand, you've got things like tea and coffee, these huge plantation crops originally brought over by the British that are now massive export industries. India is the world's second largest tea producer. So you've got this incredibly complex system, this amazing diversity of crops. But think about it. Farming on land that's been worked for thousands of years to feed a population that just keeps growing, that's a huge challenge. And that brings us to our final piece of the story, the revolution in India's fields. So here's the billion-dollar question, right? How do you grow more and more food year after year without completely wrecking the land? This has been the central challenge for India pretty much since its independence. The old ways of farming just weren't going to cut it anymore. The demand was too high. Something had to give. And that change came in waves. First, right after independence, there were land reforms to try and fix the problem of fragmented farms. But the real, true game changer, that was the Green Revolution in the 60s and 70s, which brought in high-yield seeds and a whole package of new technology. And then, in the 80s and 90s, the focus shifted to building a kind of safety net, modern support systems like crop insurance and rural banks to help farmers deal with this new reality. And the impact was nothing short of a revolution. I mean, you can see the shift so clearly. You go from these pretty low, flat yields with traditional farming, and then boom, a massive spike in productivity with the Green Revolution. The modern support systems that came later helped keep those yields high, and it fundamentally changed India's ability to feed itself. And that brings us full circle, right back to Rinjha. The Green Revolution and all these modern reforms made it possible for India to feed its own people, which is a monumental achievement. But the challenges of soil health, water shortages, and just making a living are still very real for small farmers. So we're left with this big question. As India's farms keep changing, how can all this modern progress also create a sustainable future for millions of farmers just like Rinjha and her family?